Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. In USDA zones 9 and 10, this is the month to be starting tomato seeds indoors. Now, for colder climates, you might want to wait until March. We continue our evaluation of great tomato varieties worth trying with Don Shore, owner of Redwood Barn Nursery in Davis, California. We talk strategy as well as good tomato varieties worth trying in 2021. In the world of unique-looking, tasty tomatoes, Wild Boar Farms has the market cornered. We pay a visit with owner Brad Gates. He offers up his tomato seed starting tips. And we get the lowdown on the plant of the week, the multifaceted Cornelian cherry. It's not a cherry, but a dogwood. It's a tree or shrub that can be grown just about anywhere in the United States, but it's especially successful in colder climates. It's our plant of the week. Welcome to episode 75 of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, our tomato variety preview edition, part 2. And we'll do it all in under 30 minutes. Let's go. In the last episode, you might recall we were talking with Don Shore from Redwood Barn Nursery in Davis, California. We were talking tomatoes, a little preview of maybe some tomato varieties that you ought to try. Well, there was just so much to talk about, we split it into 2 episodes. Part 1 was in episode 74 of the Garden Basics podcast, where we talked about such staples in the world of tomatoes that you ought to try growing, such as Early Girl, Big Beef, Better Boy, Champion, and the Chef's Choice line of tomatoes. Some of my favorites included Gardener's Delight and Orange Oxheart. But there were plenty more varieties that we just didn't have time for last time, so let's continue our conversation with Don Shore and our Tomato Preview 2021, Part 2. There are a lot of great new hybrids out there, and 2 years ago you introduced me to New Girl and Valley Girl.
Yeah.
Both of them, sports or offshoots of the Early Girl. And 2 years ago, they did fabulous. Last year, so-so. But I'm going to give them another chance this year.
Yeah, I always recommend that you never give up on a tomato after 1 year, and you never rave about a tomato after only 1 year, because you'll find that you'll have a cooler summer. 2017 was pretty cool. We only had a couple days over 100. Temperatures were relatively mild. A lot of varieties did really well. Same variety the next year, when we had a lot of days over 100, did not yield well. And so try them and start building a database. Make notes. This is really important. As you get older, it's hard to remember. Make notes about which ones have done well for you, and when someone does say that it's a consistent producer for them, give it a try. I mean, there are some heirlooms that have done well. Arkansas Traveler is one. I have a customer who raves about it. Okay, I finally planted it. Did very well for me. I'm not going to say it's one I'm promoting yet because I've only done it once. So we'll try it a couple of years and see how that does and whether it's consistent for this area.
Which tomato have you planted consistently year after year after year, and production has been either okay or great?
It's one of your favorites. It's an Italian heirloom. Castelluto Genovese has generally produced very well for me year after year. Old Fred and I have a lot of jokes about this because he doesn't really like this tomato. It softens quickly, and that seems to bother him. It softens
quickly on the vine. Yeah, you better pick it before it's ripe, or it's going to go soft on you.
Makes great sauce and salsa and that kind of thing. But it has been a consistent one. This kind of leads me back towards the idea that some of the Mediterranean varieties are good ones to look at. Principe Borghese, which is used for sun drying. It's a little producer, little fruit, small pear-shaped one, and very productive, very consistently productive for me. And then one that my dad always grew. So we're getting back into nostalgic types here, the old heirloom variety, San Marzano, which is an Italian variety that's been around forever and ever and is primarily used for sauce. Great for salsa, has been very consistent year after year as well.
I think for the 25th year in a row, I will be growing Sweet Million cherry tomatoes because they just perform year in and year out.
Right. I deal with young couples and young families who are planting tomatoes for the very first time. And I want to make sure that however many they get, they should get at least one or two hybrids. This is really important. So they get the consistent yield that they typically have and the disease resistance that's built in to those. Try a couple of heirlooms for fun and walk out with at least one cherry tomato of some sort. Far and away, the most popular over the years has become Sun Gold, generally a very good producer. I had some interesting feedback on it 2020, but for the most part, a very good producer. But the Sweet 100, Sweet Million group, I guess you can call them, have been very consistent as well. And in general, cherry tomatoes will grow and produce under adverse conditions. If someone has a little shade, that's not great for tomatoes, but you can certainly do a cherry tomato there, and it's very likely to give you at least some fruit. So I really like to see people get at least a cherry tomato in there just because of the consistent yield and the fact that they're so easy to grow, and kids seem to really like them. Sun Gold is still the top seller. Last decade at least, it's taken away. It leaves all the others in the dust in terms of retail sales.
I am trying a new cherry tomato this year. We always have to try one variety we've never tried before. I'm trying two varieties. They're both from Wild Boar Farms. One is Barry's Crazy Cherry, and the other is Beauty King. And Beauty King intrigues me. It's a full-size tomato, but it's a bicolored tomato. It gets, 12 to 20 ounces, so it's good sized. Yeah. But it takes a while, too. It's 75 to 90 days. But supposedly, it's just has this gorgeous interior of yellow with bright red streaks. It's very meaty and allegedly good sweet tomato flavor. I know where Brad Gates live. I know what I'll do if this is not true.
Is he guarantee it for you? Barry's Crazy Cherry is one of his top introductions. We're talking now about the Wild Boar Farms tomatoes, which were introduced by Brad Gates here in the Sacramento Valley. So he was a farmer. His goal was attractive, interesting tomatoes, heirlooms, because that's a big selling point for him, with great flavor, and colorful fruit is another thing he really likes, because he was selling to high-end restaurants. But he's not going to grow it if it doesn't make money for him. I mean, he's a farmer. He was trying to get good yields. So he was selecting these interesting open pollinated, there's some technical jargon for you, varieties out of seedlings of heirlooms that just caught his eye. He would grow them out to make sure they're stable enough because they're open pollinated, and then market them. And Barry's Crazy Cherry, along with Michael Pollan, which is another of his introductions, are two that I think will be here to stay for sure. They're incredibly productive, very reliable, seemingly over a wide range of conditions, and very interesting. Barry's Crazy Cherry, as you know, is an unusual color. Michael Pollan, the fruit looks like a shmoo. I pause and wait for everybody under 60 to look at me and go, what's a shmoo? So look it up. You have to remember little Abner comic strips to know what I'm talking about. An unusual shaped tomato with interesting coloration. You can use them when they're tangy and kind of underripe. People like to do that, or let them get fully ripe and very sweet. So those two in particular are some of his best, but also his furry boar. And he could use a little marketing strategy here on some of his names, but his yellow furry boar, very productive, very juicy. His pink and red boar tomatoes, very reliable. He's got about 30 or 40 varieties now, and I've grown most of them. And I'm finding that some of them are very consistent producers. The other one I would add to that mix is Pork Chop, which is one of the best yellow tomatoes on the market and has been a very reliable producer for me as well.
And one of his older varieties, Berkeley Tie-Dye, is still one of his big sellers as well. Yeah, I noticed that the Beauty King from Wild Boar Farms is a cross between Big Rainbow and Green Zebra. Yeah. Interesting result.
Well, I think some of these just show up on their own. And in fact, I think most of them do. He plants, hundreds of them for his farming operation. He sees an interesting seedling and he can figure out what the parentage likely is. And yes, they're mostly coming from heirlooms originally. And now these are his own unique open pollinated heirlooms. He's got a couple others that are very heavy producers. Sweet Carneros Pink is one that gets kind of overlooked. But every year I've grown it, including even hot summers, I'll get 60 to 80 fruit. And they're kind of a pink red. They're not red, they're pink, very flavorful, mostly 6-ounce range, early girl size, and great for sauces and things like that. So he does have some that are normal colors. they're not all striped and odd colors, but he has quite a number of just very uniquely flavored tomatoes.
Yeah, we'll have his website for you on the show notes, wildboarfarms.com. I'll also have a link to the word shmoo for everybody.
Right. I want to mention one other that was brought to my attention first by the master gardeners, and it was introduced to them by Dr. Robert Norris, who's a Yolo County retired botany professor who is also quite a veg crops expert. And he touts this one highly. And so I finally grew it a couple of times, and he's absolutely right. 4th of July is a deep red, high producing 4 to 5 ounce tomato. And as the name implies, you will be picking fruit by the 4th of July, which is early. Even in this area. And it's been a good producer for us, very consistent, very attractive fruit, interestingly, very bright red. And so I'm adding that one to my list of just reliable tomato varieties that if you're planting 5 or 6, make sure you got one of those in there that you know has done well for a lot of people in your region, wherever your region is. If you're listening to this podcast in Corvallis, Oregon, you got a long, cold spring. You don't jump into summer up there until pretty late in the season. Well, Oregon State has introduced some outstanding tomatoes. You probably should stick to those. If you're listening in Seattle, I would grow kale.
Okay. I'm sorry, Seattle. That was Don Shore, by the way. Redwoodbarn.com is his website.
Send your complaints and letters to Redwood Barn.
Yes.
I have friends in Seattle who built raised planters, and what is it, 200 days of overcast up there, something like that. Built raised planters, brought in this soil, planted a tomato, and sent me a picture. A month later, it had just basically done nothing. I said, yes, your problem is that you're in Seattle. You need to go ask at your local garden center what variety grows there. I also love to go to the Mendocino Coast Botanical Gardens in Fort Bragg, where the annual average temperature is 62 degrees. They have a vegetable garden there, and I don't think it even has tomatoes in it because that climate is not very conducive to it. But there are. If you scour these seed catalogs, you'll find varieties from Russia and from Europe, from Poland, and places like that where the climate is, they get a late start in the season and it's not a warm, hot summer. And so they have special varieties. Look for things labeled early. Those are going to be your best bets.
Exactly. There's actually at the Farmer Fred Ramp blog page, I have a posting on growing tomatoes in the wintertime in greenhouse. And all of the varieties mentioned are short season determinate tomatoes that would do fine in low sun areas, like Bush Early Girl or Grushovka, as you were mentioning there, right. Up in Oregon Spring 5, Polar Baby, Subarctic Maxi. Yeah, these names make you chill just thinking about them.
But they tell you the story, which is that these are people growing tomatoes at high latitudes or high altitudes or real close to the coast where it's just not really tomato country. But there are varieties, since it's such a popular fruit. I mean, it's the number one vegetable all around the world practically. There's going to be a variety that's suitable to your region. Our defining characteristic is a long growing season with a hot, dry summer. And so we need to choose for that particular characteristic here. But if you're in Florida, you've got different varieties that are going to be more suited to that sticky heat that they have down there.
Exactly. Yeah. So, hey, all gardening is local, as that guy used to say on the radio. So go with what you know. All right. Well, we learned a lot from Don Shore at Redwood Barn Nursery in Davis, California. I know we threw out a lot of names there of tomato varieties you never heard of. I will actually have links for all of those varieties so you can look them up in the show notes for today's podcast, which means I'm not going to get any sleep tonight. Oh, well. Don Shore, thanks so much for giving us a little tomato preview.
There you go. It should be a good season this year. Everybody's gardening.
We're talking with Brad Gates at Wild Boar Farms. That's BOAR, Wild Boar Farms. Excellent tomato varieties that he's hybridized over the years. They are gorgeous. Check out his website, wildboarfarms.com, and just see how gorgeous those tomatoes are. Here in Northern California, the plants will start arriving in nurseries in early April. You can order seeds from his website. So let's, Brad, talk a little bit about seed starting. Now, here in your greenhouse, when you're in the business of planting thousands of tomatoes all at one time, tomato seeds, you probably, after 25 years in the business, have it down to a system. So let's start talking about the soil that you use to start these seeds.
These are small little plugs. So I use a really fine mix that's basically a compost, perlite, peat mix. It's an extra fine texture because the cell that I'm using is about the size of the tip of your finger, so it's just a small little pinch of dirt. So it needs to be a really fine texture. This is a really medium to low nutrients. I don't want super aggressive growth in the early stages. It can cause lankiness and problems.
And so you don't fertilize. I mean, the seed has all the energy it needs to produce the cotyledons, the first leaves. But after that, how long would you leave them in these cells? And by the way, there's over 200 cells per tray. So we're really talking about less than a thumb's worth of soil in each of these. So I imagine that by the time the true leaves start, that it's time to transplant.
Yeah, so the true leaves will be, say 2 weeks away, and then about 2 weeks after that, 4 weeks total, they'll be into the first or second set of true leaves. And from there, we transplant. So if everything goes right, I'll be able to get enough nutrients to grow the little 2 or 3 inch tall sprout just from this pinch of soil. If it's really hot in here and I'm watering a lot, sometimes that can lower the nutrients. So what I'll do is I call it spoon feeding them a little bit of nutrients. I will take a organic liquid fertilizer and mix it at about 10% ratio, and then fertilize them with that with just a really weak solution of a water-soluble organic fertilizer.
And at what stage of their growth would you start that fertilization?
I'm hoping these have enough nutrients to carry them in, but what I'll do is I'll read the plant, and if I've been watering a lot, I'll keep an eye on it, and as soon as they kind of bronze a little bit and turn a light pale yellow, I'll know that pretty much all the, at least the nitrogen and probably the other nutrients is used up. So they're going to go into a stall. They'll kind of go into a tomato seedling coma, I call it. And so I'll keep an eye on that, mainly the color. As soon as they start to turn a pale yellow, I know I need to spoon feed them just a little bit of nutrients.
And that, again, is at the true leaf stage with the second set of true leaves?
It'll usually be they'll usually have plenty of nutrients to at least the true set of leaves. So you're talking 3 weeks or so from now.
Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people are in the habit of, in order to get seeds to germinate, they'll use basically propagation mats or heating pads beneath their trays or their pots where they're starting tomato seeds. I don't see any propagation mats here. You have these on pallets, and they seem to be fine. Of course, it's also 72 degrees in here.
Yeah, so if I had a small operation, I was just doing maybe a flat of seeds or something, I would maybe use a heat mat. So the heat mat will speed up your germination. Tomato seeds, I always recommend, soon as your tomato seeds come up, get it off the heat mat, because it'll actually cause excess heat and cause lanky growth. So it would just be it's not really feasible for all the square footage I have to have heating mats in here. So I find that keeping it between 50, 55 at night and 75 or so during the day, I get really good germination with tomato seeds just doing that.
What, about 8 to 14 days for germination?
I would say that's a good guess. If you had bottom heat and everything's right, sometimes I've seen seeds pop up in 3 to 5 days, but it's usually 1 to 2 weeks.
I like that tip of taking the propagation mat, turning it off, removing it after the plant has germinated so you don't cause any problems. I'm making a mental note of what I have to do when I get home now with my pepper seedlings.
Well, peppers and eggplants like the extra warmth a little bit more, so you can go ahead and ride those out for a couple more weeks.
Oh, good. Now, the peppers those seeds can take 3 weeks to germinate. Tomatoes are a lot quicker. And for people in a rush to start tomato seeds, count backwards from the time you would normally plant in the ground and back that off 8 weeks. And that's a good time to start your tomato seeds. And of course, you're doing it for a commercial market here. So you want to get them into the stores here in Northern California in the early April. So you'd be starting them. Now here it is, early February. That seems about right.
Yep. With tomato seeds, the best is about 2 months from seed to nice transplant. Under super ideal conditions, I've seen it 6 to 7 weeks. Some people will even go longer, like 10 weeks, and they'll transplant up into, say, 1 quart or even a 1 gallon. They're going for an extra big plant. With the numbers I have, I can't really play that game, but for home gardeners, they can do that.
So you have 1 tomato plant per cell. The cells, again, are maybe 1 by 1 inch deep or thereabouts. Are you really adept at chopsticks? How do you get the plant and the soil out of there?
I need to up my game and get a professional seed planter. But it's just patience and diligent fingers.
Really? Okay, not even tweezers.
Sometimes we'll use tweezers if like 2 or 3 seeds go into a cell and they're hard to grab. I'll take scissors and throw them into the cell next to it.
Popsicle sticks?
Just a little bit too big, I think.
Oh, darn. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that would be a time-consuming process.
Yeah. I seem to do everything the hard way.
Okay. Well, for a lot of people who are starting seeds, they will either start them in small containers like this or toss 4 or 5 seeds into a 3-inch pot and then transplant each one to its own pot after the true leaves are out. And these will be going into, what'd you say, 3.5-inch pots?
Yeah, 3.5-inch pots at 1 month.
All right, so that's a heck of a lot of soil. Is the soil mix different for those?
It is a little bit of a heavier. This is a really light mix just because the plug cells are so small. So yeah, once they get transplanted into the bigger cups, it's a semi-similar, but just a little bit of a heavier soil.
More compost? Is it a secret?
I guess I haven't analyzed how much of each one. I just know it seems like a heavier, hardier, doesn't dry out quite as fast soil mix. This is a extra light mix.
All right. Yeah, and this is peat moss too. And I would think that whatever it's going into would probably have less peat moss.
Yeah. It's basically perlite compost type of a mix.
I mean, frankly, for the home gardener who's transplanting little tomato plants into slightly bigger containers, you could just use a good quality potting mix at your favorite nursery.
Yeah, I always that's when I'd use regular potting mix, that's what I would do. You can top off the trays, and if anything's bigger than, say, your pinky fingernail, pick it off the top. You can also run them through like a 1/4-inch screen, just regular high-quality potting mix, just screen it at a 1/4 inch, and it makes perfect seed starting mix.
Excellent tip. And of course, as the tomatoes grow in that 3.5-inch pot, they can get kind of lanky too. But if you give them full sun, like what you have here in this greenhouse, they will tend to be fairly upright. But do you find you have to prune them?
No, if you give them plenty of light, and that's why I like the cool nighttime and then not too hot during the day in here, will make them a little bit stockier. Sometimes when you mass plant, like you're saying, put even up to 10 seeds or more in a small cup and plant them, they can fight for the light a little bit, so they can get lanky. The good things with tomato plants is you can always bury the plant in a bunch of the stem, and it will readjust itself, so to speak.
Yeah, just like if you bought a tomato plant at a nursery. If somebody bought one of yours at a nursery and decided to transplant it into the yard like they should, they would want to plant it deeper than where it was planted in the pot at the nursery.
Yeah, my general rule of thumb is plant about 20 to 30% of the plant, no matter how big it is. If it was a little seedling when I transplant, I'll plant them about 20 or 30% of the stem underneath the soil. Once I get a nice transplant that's ready for the garden, same thing. I'll trim off any leaves or suckers that are below where I'm going to plant, and then I'll bury about 20 or 30% of the stem. That keeps the potting mix it's planted in from drying out. That keeps, when the wind in the spring is blowing your plants around, it makes it a little further down in the soil so it can handle the wind, and it will also regenerate roots on the stem where it comes in contact with the moist soil.
Now, you like to say about your tomato plants, they're the heirlooms of the future. What is the definition of an heirloom? Everybody has a different one.
Yeah, the best, most common one that I can come up with is that they say it's 50 years or older seems to be the loose definition of an heirloom. That gives, because the definition of a heirloom is something that's been passed down from a generation to a generation. So somewhere along the line, somebody threw out the 50-year mark, and it seems to be the most popular. So some of my varieties are maybe working on 20 years old now, so just have a little bit of a wait. But I think when most people think when they want an heirloom is they want a tomato that's something other than round, red, and tasteless.
Exactly, because yours are beautiful. It's tough to even describe them, but they come in most colors of the rainbow. But you can check them out at wildboarfarms.com and see all those colors. I would think in your hybridization efforts, it takes a few years for it to settle down before where you can offer it to the public as a seed.
Yeah, it's typically 5 to 7 generations from the time the cross was made until you've selected year after year the best of the best, and then all the traits stabilize, the colors, the flavors, textures. After picking the same thing repetitively for 5 to 7 generations, then that variety becomes stable.
Yeah, it's interesting because even though it is a hybrid, it will stay stable as long as it isn't cross-pollinated by something else. How do you do that in the field? How do you isolate your plants?
Tomatoes typically only cross-pollinate about 1 to 3% of the time in the wild. So it's actually pretty rare. It takes, it's usually like a native bee, honeybees and stuff, some bumblebees and some of our native pollinators. Once in a while, we'll go to tomato flowers, but in general, I rarely see insects on the tomato flowers. They're not as desirable as most of what else is out there and available at the time.
Right, exactly. And if people are concerned about that, or maybe they live in a heavy, windy area, they can also isolate the plants by maybe covering them with a row cover at flowering time.
Yeah, if you were looking at, that always works. And then people have put it's not really a cheesecloth, but like a netting around the flower trusses after they pollinate, and that can, or before they pollinate, before the flowers get pollinated, and that can ensure that the rare occurrence that an insect went in there and crossed those seeds.
Boy, there's a job for somebody with nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Wow. Great operation. We're looking forward to spring and summer, and it's going to be another great tomato year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Super anxious for warmer, longer days.
All right. Brad Gates, wildboarfarms.com is his website. Check out his tomatoes. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Fred.
We like to talk with Warren Roberts. He is the superintendent emeritus of the UC Davis Arboretum, and we have a plant of the week with him every week. And we like to choose plants that you can find throughout most of the United States. Now, their colorful season may be varied depending upon where you live, but they will perform for you eventually. And Warren, the first one we want to talk about here in February is the Cornelian cherry.
Yes, the Cornelian cherry, Cornus mas. And now the genus Cornus is the genus for dogwoods. But this particular dogwood does not have the big showy bracts, but it produces clouds of yellow flowers on the bare stems of the large shrub, small tree in the winter, early spring. Cornus mas. And I looked at mas, and in Latin that means strong, like in the prefix to masculine, for example. And it is a tough little tree, native throughout the much of the Mediterranean, and then back east into the Elbours of Iran. Because after the flowers, it produces an edible fruit, kind of the same flavor as pie, not related at all, but the flavor is similar. And one of the common names for this tree is the sherbet tree, because the fruits were made into syrups that were poured over crushed ice. But this little tree is so beautiful in early spring, and when nothing else is blooming, you have these beautiful clouds of sunshine in the garden.
You are very correct. It is a small tree, about 15 to 20 feet, but this tree really has a lot of interest year-round. You've got those yellow blossoms in late winter, early spring. You've got the shiny green oval leaves, and they turn yellow in the fall. And then when the leaves fall, the fruit is there. It hangs on till the birds get them. And then you've got this flaking bark that is very interesting as well.
There's a fellow in Seattle, a Russian guy, who has a collection of different kinds. There are even kinds that have yellow fruit or orange fruit as well, or very, very dark red. So it's very delicious. You can eat them. It's a little bit sour, like the pie cherry, but then you can use the fruit to make all kinds of things. And you'll probably be the first on your block to have one. They're not that common. In the Filoli Gardens in Woodside, California, there is one of the older ones I know of here in the West, but certainly worth growing. And the leaves are not only in a beautiful shiny green, but they're slightly pleated. They have like longitudinal folds on them, and so they're very, very pretty. So it's just the beauty of this tree and the rarity of it, although, again, it is available commercially, makes it a very special plant for the garden.
And because it's only 15 to 20 feet tall, it could fit in most gardens.
It could, and it has all kinds of interest all year round.
Warren Roberts is the superintendent emeritus of the UC Davis Arboretum. Visit the Arboretum online. It's arboretum.ucdavis.edu. Warren, thank you for telling us about the Cornelian cherry.
Glad to have the opportunity, Fred.
Garden Basics comes out every Tuesday and Friday, and it's available just about anywhere podcasts are handed out, and that includes Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Overcast, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and hey Alexa, play the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, would you please? Thank you for listening, subscribing, and leaving comments. We appreciate it.